we have a huge advancement in hard drive technology. Now for systems that have SATA built in, such as the G5, Mac Pro, and of course Dell Optiplex machines, SATA hard drives, and in this case SATA SSDs, are no problem because, well, I actually have some to work with. But with systems such as the PowerMac G4, which only use IDE, I'm kind of stuck with just this external boot drive because this does support FireWire, which means that I can boot macOS off of this, but at the end of the day, it's an external hard drive and it's just not ideal. It's almost as if these were intended to have an internal boot device. Crazy, I know. So we're actually going to make that possible because of one awesome upgrade. Now I do have IDE drives to work with, but they're from other systems such as XP machines, which obviously had those hard drives to begin with. So I'm not going to take those hard drives out because once I get to the point where I want to use those machines, I'm going to have the same issue. What's going to be the boot device? There used to be a time where Steve-approved Macintoshes were everywhere, and in order to open up your Macintosh, all you had to do was just open it up. This right here is CAD, but we'll talk about that in a moment. This is the adapter that makes it entirely possible, and it's really awesome because, as you can see, we have IDE and power going into this, and we have SATA right there. So we're going to plug in a new to this PowerMac hard drive, and that means we don't have to rely on just IDE drives because, well, it's an adapter for SATA drives. So in theory, hey smokers, no, we're not going to install an SSD because this adapter was the budget for today's video. So instead, we have an even better alternative, and that is this hard drive right here. Now, I've shown this off in a previous video because, well, it's kind of not working 100% right, but it does still work, and, well, let's just go ahead and see what happens. Now, before we plug this into the G4, I will plug this into the G5 to show you some awesome statistics about this because even though it shouldn't technically work, it still does. G5 hard drive. The secret to solving this cable mess is to just take the cables and pretend as if they did not exist. So we can open up the PowerMac here, and this is going to fall immediately because, yeah. So here we have our professionally installed hard drive, just as if it was from the factory. Of course, we also got to lock it in place. You know, I was also considering removing the 3TB drive within the G5 and installing it inside another system such as the Mac Pro, mainly just because even though it's nice to have a lot of free storage, I never installed every single version of macOS which runs on this machine, and I ended up just using 10.5 Leopard the most. But now that we have the PowerMac G4, I realized that it's actually going to be useful once again to have basically a free partition to host macOS 9 files because early macOS 10 works way better with macOS 9 as compared to 10.7 on the Hackintosh. Now, I'm sure I can still get it up and running with the Hackintosh, but it's just going to be a lot easier to make the G5 essentially act as a bridge machine between even older PowerMacs such as the G4, at least when it comes to the software side of things such as macOS 9. Basically what I'm trying to say is that I removed the macOS 10 installs except for 10.3 Panther, and I'm going to reinstall basically 10.3, 10.4, and 10.5 on the G5. As for the server editions, I don't know yet, but the G4 changed everything. It works out in the end though because it just means that while we're installing macOS on this, we get to install macOS on this again, and it all starts right now. Within Disk Utility, once we open it up, we can see that we only have the highest end Macintosh components for the PowerMacs here. Now we are going to completely reformat the 3TB drive, and well, the only thing we have installed at the moment is 10.3 Panther. So yeah, this is going to be its own separate thing. But in terms of the hard drive for the PowerMac G4, as you can see, it is a 500 GB drive, and it's so good that it says it's failing to do such a bad job at being a hard drive because it's so good. I mean, it even has it in red text here to emphasize how excellent of a drive this is. What do you mean it says failing because it's failing to work as a hard drive? Just because the budget for today's video went into the IDE to SATA adapter doesn't mean that we have to use low-end hardware. Okay, maybe it's not the best idea to use a hard drive like this, but I'm still going to use it. Now, I did try it out with a Windows PC and a newer copy of Windows, and even though it did install successfully, the more I began to use it, the more it started to slow down. But the thing is, we're not installing Windows. We're going to install macOS 9, which fits on a single CD and is obviously way more lightweight compared to a newer version of Windows or even a newer version of macOS. Now, after macOS 9, I also plan on installing the really early versions of macOS 10, but again, these were optimized to run on hard drives in the first place. I imagine that as long as the disk usage isn't too crazy, it should still continue to work. Even if it doesn't work out with macOS 10, it can still be a dedicated macOS 9 drive. Now, normally when the smart status says that it's failing, you should not install a new operating system, but I don't care. And even if it does eventually fail, that just means that we get to work on the Power Mac again. Now, I have no idea if this hard drive is going to last long enough for any of these macOS 10 installations, but I went ahead and made 6 different partitions anyways. Now, I believe this system should also support macOS 8, but I barely know anything about macOS 9, let alone macOS 8. It's going to help a lot to learn more about macOS 9 and actually use it. So for right now, we just have Macintosh HD for macOS 9, and it's macOS Extended because macOS Extended Journaled wasn't introduced until, well, after macOS 10. And I believe that the earliest versions here are still with macOS Extended, not Journaled. So for right now, they are formatted as is. But with 10.2 Jaguar, I have it with Journaled. We can always change these in the future if the hard drive is still okay in the first place. But every single one of the partitions here are 77 gigabytes, so it should be plenty of storage for an older version of macOS like this. And we have everything going up to Tiger because I believe that this is the last version of macOS that is natively supported on this system. So we have everything that we could possibly want, at least to start off with. Well, Macintosh HD just showed up as well as the other partitions here, so it's actually working. Now that's how it's done. And as for the G5, we're going to keep it simple with 4 different partitions. We're still going to have a 10.3 Panther, 10.4 Tiger, and 10.5 Leopard partition, but we're also going to have one empty partition to use as free space to transfer files over between macOS 10 and macOS 9. Now, eventually, it would be nice to try out the server editions, but it's also nice to just have macOS installed in the first place. One professional hard drive installation later, and it's ready to go. You get macOS 9, and you get macOS 10.5 Leopard. Over here we have macOS 9.2 with all the extensions, which is just awesome to see. And over here we have the macOS install DVD. Dude! Now these are what you call real macOS installers. So I was just about to install macOS 9, except for the fact that we don't have any partitions here. So it looks like I probably forgot the macOS 9 drivers within macOS 10. If I do click on initialize, it will show up with the different partitions, or at least in this case, different volumes. But you know what? Honestly, let's just go ahead and initialize this. We can always copy this partition onto macOS 10 and basically just redo the same thing once we have it completely set up and installed. It's going to be easier to install macOS 9 and then do this later on. So we do have Untitled now on the desktop. We can actually rename this to Macintosh HD. So the fact that it does show up and it allowed me to rename it indicates that the drive is still working. So with this we can quit out of drive setup and disk first aid. Hey, I'm still learning more about macOS 9 here, so I don't really care about this right now. I just want to get to a usable desktop. So now that it'll actually work, Let's start the install process for real. Now, it doesn't detect the full capacity because of macOS 9 limitations and the IDE bus. But again, it doesn't matter, so let's go ahead and continue. So we have these awesome features, such as macOS 9.2.2 recommended installation. Now, I will also select Network Assistant Client. I have no idea what this does, but, you know, why not have it? So let's start the install. Now it's time for macOS 10. So we will start the installation here, waiting for the drive to spin up. Now, first off, we need to go into Utilities. It's actually insane to think that there's not even a decade in terms of macOS Leopard here and macOS 9. Like, we went from Platinum to Aqua in such a fast amount of time. It's crazy to think about. So let's go ahead and erase the drive to start off fresh. As for macOS 9, it still has 7 minutes remaining. First one will be 10.3 Panther, and then 10.4 Tiger. Now, when am I going to install these versions? I have no idea. But we're making them anyways just because, well, we have all of this space on the hard drive. So we have 10.3 Panther, 10.4 Tiger, and then 10.5 Leopard. And this will be macOS 9 server, I guess. Apply, partition. Like I mentioned earlier, I will eventually try out server editions as well, but it's always taking a long time just to get normal macOS usable in the first place. Like, I'm happy with the Hackintosh and how macOS Lion has worked out really well, but it took a while to get all of that configured. Of course, we will continue. We're going to install on... That's interesting. It doesn't show up with an icon. Install macOS. Continue. Customize. Now, I will remove this. As awesome as it is to have printer drivers, it does take up a fair amount of time in the install process. Do we need these? I mean, it's cool. We have the space for it. You know what? Yeah, let's leave it. As for this, it's now done. So the installation process has finished. We will quit out of this, and now if we go into, okay, where was it? It's not chooser, that's network stuff. It should be in control panel. Yeah, startup disk. Here is macOS 9 on the Macintosh HD folder. And I will remove the CD just to ensure that it will start up on the hard drive. Welcome to macOS 9. Awesome. Check it out, we got extensions. Even though it may appear that it is peak party time, we do have an incorrect time because the clock battery doesn't work in terms of it doesn't exist. So, welcome to the macOS Setup Assistant. Based on your answers to a few questions, this assistant makes some basic settings on your computer and sets it up so you can share files over a local network. Okay, that'll be nice to have. This setup starts with some questions, so, okay. So let's go ahead and continue. Yes, this is correct. Finder preferences. If you are new to computers or plan to limit your computer use to 1 or 2 application programs, you might consider using the Simple Finder preference in the Finder program. The Finder is the program you use to view and organize the files and folders on your computer desktop. So yeah, we don't have a start button here. We have Finder, we have the control strip, and well, it's not the Finder that we know in macOS 10, but it is still Finder. Simple Finder limits available features but may be easier to use. You can always change this preference later after you've become more familiar with your computer system. Do you want to use it? You know what, we're just going to leave this as no because, well, it may take a little bit of time to learn how to use this in the first place. I'd rather have it as is instead of deal with this. Now, as for the computer name, I will have this as Power Mac G4 AGP Graphics. So Power Mac G4 AGP Graphics. Shared folder. When your computer is on a local network, you can create a folder and let other people have access to files in that folder. Now, I don't think this is identical to macOS 10 file sharing, so I don't know how well this is going to work out of the box, but I'm still going to have this as yes, and I'll leave it as the computer name, PowerMac G4 AGP Graphics. I do have Ethernet plugged into the system, so it should be completely fine to use now. But instead of configuring internet, because this is not dial-up, I'm just going to leave that as is. If we go into the Apple menu, we can go to internet, maybe. That's like the options for the browser. So honestly, I'm not too sure. If it's not internet, I thought there was another option here. Let's just browse the internet and see if we have a connection. Microsoft Internet Explorer 5. Okay, so Ethernet is working because we obviously have a connection, which is awesome. And as for macOS 10 here, we still have around 17 minutes left on the install. What do we do now? I guess we need to power up the Hackintosh, maybe try, some file sharing server things. And within the trash, we have the airport setup assistant. Now, I don't have an airport card set up, but I would still like to have that not in the trash. Always snap to grid. Yes, we will do that, because I know that with macOS 9, it can get messy pretty fast. What do we do now, I guess? I mean, we can take a look at macOS 9 as a whole. It's completely different because it's macOS 9. We don't have a dock, we have this right here. And this is kind of like the options within Windows XP where you have the clock and the things onto the side there. So we have volume, we have QuickTime right here, we have, what else do we have? Is this file sharing? No, this is web sharing. I think at this point I'm going to get the Hackintosh powered up, maybe get some more macOS 9 applications. Now, I do know that it's easier to use things like a local FTP server with macOS 9, but we still need this to be powered up and ready to be used with that because, well, that's kind of why I'm reinstalling macOS in the first place. I do still need to get some software for macOS 9 because up until now, I've mainly just been focused on macOS 10 because, well, I didn't have a macOS 9 system, but now we do. Apple DVD player, look at this control. It's so cool seeing these elements of macOS 10 basically within macOS 9. I know it's not exactly Aqua, but this is still like year 2000 futuristic design here. I believe we actually had some extra installs within the macOS 9 CD, so I'm putting it back in the optical drive. I think we have iTunes 2. Applications, macOS 9. Yeah, we have iTunes 2 right here. We also have Adobe software. Now, I have no idea how this works, so let's just click on Install iTunes. About iTunes. iTunes lets you create your own personal digital music library, allowing you to manage and play your collection of high-quality MP3s and drag and drop simplicity. With a supported CDRW drive, you can even create your own custom audio CDs or MP3 CDs. Wow, this is really the future. iTunes 2.0.4 offers expanded AppleScript support and improved stability and performance. iTunes works with all Macintosh computers that have a built-in USB port. macOS 9.0.4 is required. macOS 9.2.1 or later is recommended. Copyright 2001, updated 2002. So let's continue with this. I've never used an older version of iTunes like this. Installation. You have installed software which suggests you restart your computer. If you're done, click restart. PowerMac G5 has around 5 minutes remaining. Alright, so time for the Hackintosh here. Now, as awesome as it is to leave it like this, we still have to deal with copyright, so let's just keep this casually in the background. Wait for the Hackintosh to power up. The smart status on this hard drive said it was failing. It works completely fine with macOS 9. So here we have iTunes 2. Man, this is so cool. iTunes plugins? That's crazy. So, of course, we will continue. Welcome to iTunes. Based on your answers to a few brief questions, this assistant will configure iTunes and alert you to any additional information you need to know about the application and your system. So, okay, internet playback, sure. automatically connect. On occasion, iTunes needs access to the internet for information about audio CDs. Okay, yeah, so if that's for like the Grace Note CD database, we will continue. Well, we don't have anything because it's a fresh install. Whoa. Okay, that's really cool. It's like you get to experience Aqua, but you're still on macOS 9. Now, I don't think the radio tuner really does anything, but I do know that there are versions of iTunes where that's patched, so you can use the internet functionality again. Okay, so the install on the G5 side of things is almost complete. As for the audio CD, we have Pilgrim right here because it's what I have on hand. Let's go ahead and try this out. It works. So the CD database still works. Honestly, this is like a super clean version of iTunes. Like, all it has is your library and that's it. Like, I mean, what else do you need, really? Let's go ahead and import this because why not? We have the space available. And to avoid copyright, I guess we can leave that very slightly running in the background here. This is still not done. It's been on about a minute for a couple of minutes. Sounds about right. Now this is the future. Optical media going at 5 times speed. Honestly, that speaker can get pretty loud. It's actually kind of weird to see this because it doesn't have the standard options here. It has the macOS 9 options. Whoa. It worked first try here, so it'll restart right now. Okay, so apparently the green check mark showed that it doesn't know it has an install, even though it's successfully installed, yet it's not showing up on the G5. It's not even showing up on the PowerBook G4. Remember this thing? Yeah, I brought it out here to install macOS onto this as if it's an external hard drive because for some reason, the hard drive within the PowerMac G4, which said it was failing, continues to work just fine. Yet this, I don't know. I know it's installing on the Tiger partition. I don't care. I just want to have a working copy of macOS, and I'll just rename it to 10.5. We'll repartition the drive as needed, but it's not completely for nothing, at least for the PowerBook itself, because I needed to charge up the batteries anyways, so at least I'm able to do that right now. And as for the batteries, they are usually always right here. On the bright side, I guess it means you guys get some extra video content, so I guess that's good. Not exactly ideal to have to wait for macOS to install again, but even with the biggest problems that optical media has in terms of, you know, it not working for some reason, I still prefer this method of installation because it's offline. It's still pretty awesome to use. I mean, when it does work as intended, and at least I don't have to deal with any slopware, online services, you know, waiting for the OS itself to download. It's all physically right here on the CD, and yet it's still hilarious to me that the failing hard drive works without an issue, yet this has other unknown problems. It's always a good day when you get to use the PowerBook again. I really do need to use it more, but what's funny about the setup here is that we have 2 additional new systems, the Dell Optiplex with Windows XP and now the PowerMac G4, and once again we are probably going to have to deal with like some rearranging of the setups, and well, I mean, we do have some space here, but this is more of the PC side of things, so for now I may actually install this at the beige setup just to have, you know, more usable space. The more Macintoshes we add here, the more we have to change the setup yet again, because we do also have the Hackintosh right over here. I don't know, I'm just going to have to do some rearranging again, but that just means we're also going to have even more content in the future about the setup itself. I do still have a lot of accessories that I can't wait to use more in terms of like actual displays. I mean, we still have that one right up there, which really isn't being used at the moment. So maybe we can figure out a way to make use of that more with another system. There's just a lot of potential with the setup here, and yeah. The whole point of this desk setup was to not have a floor setup, and yet again we are at the floor with the floor setup. It seems like the green check mark actually worked this time because now we have an install. Yeah, it's on 10.4 Tiger, but it shows up. So let's go ahead and test it out. This is still with the PowerBook. Okay, this is awesome. So the video itself is loading, which means that the install was successful. It's booting off of the G5, and before this actually completes, I'm going to power this down because I want to make a copy of this install before it's set up, and we're going to use the Seagate hard drive here. So we're going to have a spare partition on this drive, make a copy of the macOS installation just to have as a complete backup. You know, it's already been installed, but it hasn't been set up yet. I still have no idea why it refused to show up on the G5 natively, but you know what, let's just pretend that nothing happened and boot up into macOS. Welcome to macOS 10. We've seen the macOS Leopard setup here several times before in the past, but it's always awesome to see because it just says welcome. Of course, it's a fresh install. Yes, we already own a Mac, but it's going to be not a Time Machine backup, just a fresh copy of Leopard. If you don't have an Apple ID, just click Continue. Now, as awesome as it would be to have an Apple ID set up with Leopard, well, it's macOS Leopard from 2007, so yeah, it's not exactly going to work like it used to. And as for the registration, you can actually press Command Q to skip this part, and just like that, we can now create the user account, and best of all, you don't have to connect to the internet. It's just a local account because it's a normal operating system. Just like before, we're going to call it PowerMac G5 with the short name being just G5. Now, it both keeps it simple because it's a PowerMac G5, and I also have a user account on the Dell Hackintosh server for the PowerMac G5, which keeps it simple when you want to access the file server itself. All you have to do is log in with the same credentials, and it works. And of course, as always, enjoy your Apple computer. And here we are finally at a desktop again. I do also see the advantage of having a separate dedicated boot drive for just the main OS. As awesome as it is to have many different partitions on one hard drive, the G5 does have 2 hard drive bays, not just one. We could further upgrade the system as well to have even more storage. That, or maybe swap out the 3TB drive for several other hard drives. At this point, it would have been really nice to actually have the macOS 9 drivers and a properly partitioned hard drive for macOS 10. Now, it is still the first time I'm really dealing with classic macOS, so there's that. And the other advantage here is that you guys also get to watch extra content at the expense of me trying to figure this out. But so far, I've copied over the macOS 9 install onto the external Seagate hard drive using the G5. Now, is this going to work if I restore it? I have no idea. Wow, very cool. Thanks for sharing. This drive has reported a fatal hardware error to disk utility. If the drive has not failed completely, back up as much data as you can and then replace it with a working drive. That just sounds more like a skill issue to me because it was able to install macOS 9 without a problem. In fact, we even imported a CD onto it, so yeah, it's working just fine. So I went back into the DVD installer just to see if it has the same error message, and sure enough, it does. So I guess I'm not going to be partitioning this for now. It's destined to be a macOS 9 drive because, well, I mean, it works under macOS 9, but I guess I'm not going to be using it for macOS 10. Maybe it'll magically fix itself. Well, I guess for now, I'll just leave the hard drive as is. I know it says that, it's apparently failing. I'm just going to continue to use it until it completely stops working. Maybe it's its own way of telling me, don't use macOS 10 or it will fail, but it'll still run with macOS 9 because it's light enough of an operating system to still be okay on a hard drive like this. It's not that big of a deal because it'll still be a while until I get to early macOS 10, like the really early versions, and at that point, hopefully I'll have even more hard drives to use. So yeah, I guess it's just the dedicated macOS 9 drive. Or we could just erase the drive and pretend as if the smart information doesn't exist. Now technically it doesn't exist because this is on the PowerMac G4 with my PowerBook installer for 10.3 Panther, and well, as you can see, it doesn't complain, but that's because it's obviously an IDE device with an adapter. I'm pretty sure it'll still complain on the G5, which natively supports SATA, and the whole point of macOS 9 in the first place was to try out macOS 9. So yeah, we're just going to exit out of this installer. Now, I wanted to install 10.3, but because of the hard drive being the way it is, we're just going to quit out of this and reboot back into macOS 9. There used to be a time where software updates actually meant something. Believe it or not, they were actually good, useful, and even nice to have. And they managed all of this in less than a gigabyte file size. Now in this case, for 10.5.8, the update is only 768 megabytes. And as for iTunes, it's 167, but that's kind of to be expected because iTunes at this point had more features. It obviously had support for iPods and iOS devices going up to iOS 5, at least with version 10.6.3. And the reason why we have to update in the first place is because with optical media, the installer itself is stuck on 10.5.1. It's actually a pretty cool way of having an archive of an older version of macOS, but if you want to update it to the latest, then yeah, you gotta use software update, which is awesome because it still works under 10.5 and even 10.4 Tiger. And the other cool part about this is that, do you notice anything distracting about software update? Even though it's connected to the internet, it's not asking you to update unnecessary services, sign into your Microsoft account, and at this point you'd be lucky to see RAM usage this low in Windows 11. That is, if you even have RAM nowadays. The nice part about our PowerPC system here is that we have 6 gigabytes of DDR RAM. I know, awesome. So I'm gonna go ahead and install the updates here. macOS 9 is literally built different. Right now I have Internet Explorer opened up, but we don't have a dock and we don't have any sort of anything to tell us that it's open, except for the fact that if you go up here in Finder, you can select it right here. And to open up a new window, we go up here in the File menu, select New Window, and just like that, we have access to the internet. Now obviously this is not exactly a super modern web browser anymore. Well, it is Internet Explorer 5 Macintosh edition. Now it's obviously not going to work for the majority of modern websites, but with Macintosh Garden here, it loads just fine. This is basically future technology. You can go to a website, click on this link right here, and it's downloading at like 56K speeds basically. Like, I'm not exactly sure why it's so slow. This might be a macOS 9 thing. This might be an option where I need to change it from like dial-up speeds to local access network speeds. Or maybe it's because macOS 9 just has terrible Ethernet management, networking. It should not be an issue with macOS 10, but I guess it is one way to get the authentic experience. This is 700 kilobytes, but with Transmit, this basically allows us to connect to an FTP server, which is the plan with the G5 because it has it built in within Leopard and older. And with the extra macOS 9 partition, I'm going to transfer everything from the Hackintosh server onto the G5, and then we can use this to connect up to the G5. Please log into a server. So the G5 is basically going to become another server for this machine. So we have Macintosh HD, the airport setup, so this is like all the things on the desktop here. We do also have Sherlock. I know that's a thing. We haven't taken a look at this, but Sherlock is a thing. I don't really know much about Sherlock. I know it's kind of like Spotlight in a way, where you can find files and basically index the drive. Yeah, I don't know much about this program, but it is really cool to see. Amazon.com, new window? You can have multiple Sherlock instances? Interesting. Yeah, this is cool, but I'm going to have to do some more research with Sherlock. It's time for even more updates. Nice. Anyways, going back to macOS 9, if we go back to Internet Explorer here, and we open up a new window, you can see that alongside Macintosh Garden, we have a new bookmark. This is Cornica, and it's basically what you see here. Video entertainment for QuickTime users. Now this is a really cool website because it's kind of like if YouTube existed, but it's QuickTime only, and it's for like macOS 9 and macOS 10 era systems. And the awesome part about this is that, as you can see, it loads just fine within macOS 9 here. We have iPod advertisements, we have the Apple TV introduction. Here's a commercial for the iPod Nano. And I believe we can also go into the Apple menu here, go down to Control Panel, and then we have a QuickTime trademark settings option here. Connection speed is 56K modem. Yeah, we can change that to LAN. So after a while, the video actually popped up here in a separate window. Now, I'm not entirely sure if I have all of the necessary codecs for QuickTime itself. This is yet another thing that I need to do more research into, but it does actually play. And the video is playing back really well, actually. It may not be extremely high resolution, but it does work. And this is for the iPod Nano 2nd generation. And it does appear that it's actually streaming this entirely through Internet Explorer because we do not have QuickTime opened up. It's just the browser itself. Now, even though these systems might not be ideal for the modern internet anymore, awesome websites like this basically revived the classic internet, Web 1.0 design, and even though it may not be the fastest, which I'm not blaming the website, I'm pretty sure it's something to do with macOS 9 or some internet configuration settings that need to be changed. So with the G4 and the G5 now in a usable state, nice! I started to look at the network settings to see how we can communicate between macOS 9 and macOS 10. Now initially I thought that FTP was basically going to be the only option here. The nice part about using other old Mac systems is that they can work with one another because these systems support AFP, Apple Filing Protocol. So even though newer versions of macOS have FTP, because the Hackintosh and the G5 both support AFP as well as the G4, we can actually use built-in macOS 9 features to communicate right alongside the G5. I did try to connect the macOS 9 system up to the Hackintosh, and even though it does recognize it, it says that it's using a new version of AFP and it simply can't connect. It does, however, work with the G5, which is awesome. Now, is this a little complicated of a setup just to transfer over a file? Probably, but in the long run, it's definitely going to be a lot more convenient compared to just copying it over with a USB stick or a FireWire drive. I don't have to physically deal with any of the connections here. It's all on the network. It's really cool when we get to use the Hackintosh server because everything is already configured. We have PowerMac credentials. I was able to easily log into the server itself, and right now we have the macOS 9 applications drive on screen here. So what I've done is I've copied some apps and games onto the local drive of the G5 just to try it out. And on macOS 9, all we have to do is go to the Apple menu, go down to Chooser, and this will allow us to connect using Apple Share. And just like that, it's like on macOS 10. You just need to log in and connect to the server. Honestly, I wasn't expecting it to look so similar to macOS 10. I mean, the layout here is basically identical, except for the fact that it's obviously in macOS 9 Platinum. And even though it's not exactly the fastest as compared to on the G5, this is still very fast because it's Ethernet. You know, we never actually took a look at the proper display resolution here, but down in the control strip, if we open up Monitor's control panel, we can see that it does actually detect our display here, the 760V TFT, which is awesome. Colors are in the millions, and right now the resolution is 1024 by 768. Now, I know we can increase the resolution, but for macOS 9 here, I think I'll actually leave it as is because right now it looks pretty sharp. I'm pretty sure that all of the icons here are going to be impossible to see on a higher resolution. In fact, we could try it out right now at 1280 by 1024. This is actually even sharper. The icons are a bit smaller. Honestly, I might use this resolution as well because it does appear even sharper than before. But just to make it a bit easier for the video, I will leave it at 1024 by 768. And it does also have a actual color sync profile, which is also really cool. So what do we have to try out here? We have the Bungie Mac Action Sack. Yeah, that's what it's actually called. We have Duke Nukem 3D Atomic Edition, and we also have Mac Tracker. Believe it or not, Mac Tracker was a thing when macOS 9 was still current. And last but not least, we have Process Info. This is basically the macOS 10 version of Activity Monitor for macOS 9. Now, it's obviously not going to be identical, but it's still nice to have something like that because as far as I know, macOS 9 doesn't exactly have like the same thing. And here it is, processinfo.app. So we don't have like a visual display here, but it is still nice to have something like this just to see what's running in the background, what takes up CPU and memory usage. Yeah, this will definitely be a nice utility to have. So with this out of the way, we can take a look at Mac Tracker. For Mac Tracker, I actually have a variety of different versions to try out, from 1.0 all the way to Mac Tracker 4. Now, Mac Tracker 4.0.2 should be the latest that'll run on macOS 9, but honestly, it'll be interesting to see the very first version here. And this is a .sit file, so we gotta use Stuffit Expander. Hey smokers, welcome! Mac Tracker provides detailed information on every Mac ever made, including items such as processor speed, memory, and expansion options. Also included is information on Apple monitors, plus inkjet and laser printers. Mac Tracker also sports a built-in update engine to ensure the database is always up to date. Probably not going to work anymore, but it doesn't really matter because we have other versions right here. As for system requirements, you need a power Macintosh computer, macOS 8.5 or later, 16 megabytes of RAM, and 10 megabytes free on your hard drive. I know, you need a pretty intense system to run this. And for the really advanced functionality of updates, you also need an internet connection. Mac Tracker 1.0. Installation was successful. I've never seen Mac Tracker like this. This is cool. We even have all these icons here. Classic Macintosh. Goes up to the Quadra 950. Macintosh Performa. 6400, 6410. Power Macintosh. It goes up to the digital audio, so it does have, not the PCI graphics, it does have our Macintosh here, the AGP model. Now, in newer versions of Mac Tracker, you can press the Mac itself and it'll play the startup chime, but this doesn't have it. For this, though, we can see that ours is the 450 megahertz model, so we have, not the 500, but still a pretty awesome system. We do have a DVD-ROM drive, we have the optional zip drive. Original macOS was 8.6, ATI Rage 128 Pro, and as for the iMac, the newest is just iMac 2001. We do also have portables such as PowerBooks and the iBook. It does have the PowerBook G4. Wow, at this point these were already considered vintage. We do have the cinema display, which is awesome, and here we have the printers. Mac Tracker Help, copyright 2001. I guess we can see if this will actually update. Yeah, connection cannot be established. That's kind of to be expected. And just to see the difference in how it's evolved, we're going to go directly to Mac Tracker 4. Mac Tracker provides detailed technical information on every Apple Macintosh model, alongside with information on Motorola Power Computing and UMax clones. So this one actually has like all the clone computers as well. And it's new enough to have airport base stations, the iPod, Newtons, and of course macOS versions. So both the RAM usage and the hard drive space increased to 20 megabytes, but you can still use a Power Mac with 8.5. You do need Apple QuickTime though, and of course the internet again. Already it has way more images and other files because you can see, it's doing this in real time. So let's go ahead and go back to the hard drive here because this is, it's not Finder on macOS 10, that's for sure. Okay, so it did update the app itself. Would you like to receive news about Mac Tracker? And already this is like more similar to more modern versions because, well, clearly there's a lot more Macs here and other, Apple devices because they actually existed at this point. I can see we even have the eMac. Models with a G4 processor, models that came with Tiger. Whoa. Okay, so we have 2005, copyright 2006, so this is actually a bit newer than I thought. So we have the airport base stations. The newest one here is the Express. Now this is the first generation. At this point it was still supported because you could go to the Apple store and buy this brand new, but at this point modern Mac Tracker would say it's obsolete. Where would like the okay, so if we go to Classic Macs here and we go to the 128K, this is considered obsolete because, well, yeah. Even in 2006, that would be ancient technology. Macintosh TV, is this also obsolete? It is. What about the newest Quadra listed here? This too is also considered obsolete because it doesn't even have a PowerPC chip. It has the 68040. Now, as for something a bit more up to date, the first ever iMac G3 should still be supported, which it is. So that's cool to see. Original macOS is 8.1. Maximum was 10.3.9. The summer 2001 revision. Yeah, this one still supports the latest release of macOS 10, which at this point would have been Tiger because Leopard was 2007. As for the eMac, we have the model going up to 2005. These do actually have startup chimes, which I think I just did not notice before. Yeah, it does have all the startup chimes as well. Macintosh LC. It's really cool to see old versions of Mac Tracker because it's as if you can go back in time and pretend that, you know, these are still up-to-date models because it says that it's supported. PowerMac G5 late 2005. I mean, we don't even have Intel machines here. For now though, we'll go ahead and quit out of Mac Tracker and try out some games. So I was going to open up Duke Nukem, but because it's an ISO file and macOS 9 can't mount it like macOS 10, I found out there's a program called Shrink-Wrap, which should be able to do just that so we can open it up. Now, is it going to work? I don't know. So Shrink-Wrap appears to be a pretty cool utility with a lot of different features built in, but I can't get it to open up these ISO files. I'm not exactly sure if it's the app itself or if I'm just doing something wrong. But I also found this, Virtual CD DVD ROM utility, which is, well, I mean, it's in the name. It'll mount the ISO image, and this is exactly what we need. Will it work? It does. Okay, so this is exactly what we needed. So the Mac Action Sack is pretty cool because it has Marathon, all three of the games here, as well as some other Bungie titles. I've never played any of these titles, but I guess it would be cool to try out Marathon. Now this is Marathon, copyright 1994. And what are even the controls for this? This does actually have mouse support. And let's see, forward is the... Oh, so this is like set up to the keypad. Okay, so the mouse does work. I don't really know much about the story about Marathon, but I do know that it is a classic Mac title. And it's cool to see it running on macOS 9. It is funny to see the low window size though. It is set to high resolution, and I guess we could go with millions of colors. Marathon doesn't have enough memory? Really? I guess we'll go back to 256 colors here. Okay, so this time it does load. And we have a larger image. So 4, 5, 6, and 8 are basically WASD in this case. But we don't have an overlay. And of course we gotta try out Duke Nukem. It does show up as a DVD. Dude! It's time for Duke Nukem. Reality is our game. Trademark. So I've seen this introduction several times before, but I've never actually played this game until now. I know there's like a secret up here, but I don't know exactly how you get to it, so I'm just going to continue with the map. 3D graphics, man! I don't even know what's going on here. Is this the way you're supposed to go? Oh, okay, so it does open. Okay, so you go down here again. So now I know a bit more about the map. So just speed run this. Man, these controls, I gotta get used to these controls. I'm sure there's a way you can optimize it. Oh, I needed that. Okay, what is going on here? Actually, how do you... There should be other weapons. How do you switch weapons? Oh, okay, so it's just numbers. Or not. Anyways. The graphics on this is actually pretty nice. And because it is, of course, a PowerPC Mac, we do not have any slowdown at all. Okay, can we speedrun this? No, we can't. Lunar Apocalypse? Whoa. So that's like a shield. Okay, now we have a shotgun. That's cool. But where do we go now? I believe this is also the rocket launcher. And I just now realized that the numbers are actually listed right here. So, okay, we'll go back to the default. Okay, so that turned it off. It's not a timer, you just have to deactivate the door. If you look down, okay. And that was a quick view at Duke Nukem. Clearly, I still have a lot to learn with macOS 9 and all of these awesome applications, but we did learn a little bit in terms of extra utilities, such as actually mounting a ISO on the desktop here. Mac Tracker itself, I already knew about it. I use it all the time. But it is really cool to see these really early versions. And have you noticed that all of the software here just works? It doesn't ask you to connect to the internet. Like, you can just open it up. It doesn't complain. There are no servers that these are dependent on because it's all natively on the system here. And all of these applications take up less than a gigabyte. And with that, I think we're at a good point to wrap up today's video. We got both of the Power Macs up and running. I know for the G5, it seems like we're always reinstalling macOS, but hopefully for now, it'll stay as is. And as for the hard drive on the G4, as long as it continues to work, I'm going to continue to use it. It's not like it's really that useful anyways with a newer system because, well, apparently it's a failing hard drive, but under macOS 9, it still seems to work just fine. I know we covered a lot of different topics, but it was really awesome to put everything together. Now we actually have another working Power Mac in the setup here. This video is probably going to take forever to edit, but hopefully it was worth it. And if you guys enjoyed today's video, then consider leaving a thumbs up. And if you want to see even more awesome content about Power Macs, old macOS, and of course, everything over here, such as the Hackintosh, mini disk, and even Windows XP machines, then consider subscribing. But that's it for now. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.